Hi everybody, my name is Pam Dingle. I work for Ping Identity, and this is a master class session. So this is 50 minutes of SCIM and user provisioning. I had to actually check the slide to remember what that was. And our goal here for SCIM and user provisioning is to start at 0. So we're not going to assume that you have mad skills. There'll be a few things that we assume. Like we're going to assume you know what an account is and what a credential is and a few things like that. But, oh, here comes the caffeine. Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. But the real goal here is to talk about things as close to first principles as we can, and also to dive into SCIM right from the beginning. So we'll show you how to actually authenticate, get in, how to make your different commands. And if you guys, how many people here have computers and would be interested in trying the stuff as they go? Okay, so I have a plan. It's a never tried before plan, which means it could be a miserable failure. However, I'm going to tweet the link to a WebEx, and I'm going to actually paste all my code samples and things that you would use in your tools into the WebEx with the hope that you can then paste it into your computers and make this all work. So it's gonna be an epic experiment, and we're gonna try it and see how it goes. So I have Twitter up here, and I'm just gonna post it with a CIS NOLA tag, and if you don't know, just ignore. So we'll see how that. That's right. No one will even have a clue. It's going to be awesome. I also don't know if my personal WebEx session can actually handle this many people. So, you know, it'll be an adventure. There we go. All right, so that's tweeted out. You should be able to find it on Twitter. And as you can tell, this is going to be as interactive as we can possibly make it, right? So we're going to try and dig to the depth where you guys want to dig, and we're going to try stuff and get you to try it, and if things aren't working, we have SCIM experts here who can come give you a hand, and we'll make it what we want it to be. So I got a chat window here. So go ahead and join. I'm going to do a prelude before we get to the coding bits. And it's not really coding. That's the other thing, right? That's great about SCIM, and that's why we can do this, is you don't need any special tools unless you want to open up Chrome and download Postman, because we will be using that later on. So that's like the advanced hint of where we're off to. Right then. So let's talk about the general topic to start with. Dum, dum, dum. Or PowerPoint could die. Let's see. Yay, there we go. Okay, so just a bit of level set to kind of get us all on the same page. Feel free to jump up at any time and add things or rephrase if we absolutely have to. So what do we actually even mean when we talk about user provisioning? Is it, you know, it could be one of many, many things. So I'm going to offer you a total pseudo-historical answer that probably isn't, I don't even know if it's the origin of the term, but when you think of provisioning, you know, in the old days, provisioning a ship meant that you were going on a voyage, you were going to be out of contact with the world for a long, long time, and your people had to survive. So there was a concept of a quartermaster, right? Somebody who was in charge of making sure that there was not something left behind that would turf the entire mission, right? Turf the entire voyage. So, you know, when we talk about provisioning, we're talking about getting the right things in the right place at the right time to ensure success. So that's as close to a historical overview I can give you of that term. However, there is a electronic equivalent today. So this map is a bit of an eye chart, and that's because that's what our lives are. Our lives are an identity eye chart. So there's a lot of systems that work together to provide identity infrastructure. That includes user credentials, it includes information about users, it includes information about corporate understanding of who the user is, its roles, its entitlements, its virtual directories. The amount of geekitude that we deal with every day is a huge amount. But when you look at this all as a whole, this is an attempt to create state, okay, to understand the state of your enterprise. Okay, so you look at your roles and entitlements. They are an attempt to digitally explain what your business does and who the people are in your business and what they do. So this doesn't even cover all of your applications, which are islands in and of their own that probably have little bitty pieces of all of this. Okay, so this organizational complexity represents data about the running of your company that may or may not be necessary to push out to other systems in the world. So you may need to know, for example, who the CEO is, right? How do you get that simple piece of information to every single system that, for example, might want to always let the CEO in? So that's sort of the simple problem statement that we're trying to get to. We're trying to make sure that every system that's operating on corporate information is operating on the most up-to-date, the most timely, the most accurate piece of data. And there are some very specific and very simple benchmarks as to whether you're getting it right or not. If your SOX audit shows 5 dead people in your database, then you did not get it right. And that's a real life situation. I consulted for a company a while back where the very first SOX audit they ever did, they found people who had been deceased for over a year in SOX critical systems. So obviously when your CIO or your CISO finds those, that the confidence in your ability to actually be properly representing the state of your enterprise goes down. So you want to not have that happen. You also want to be absolutely sure that when a terminated employee walks out of the building with their little box full of stuff and their little cactus plant, that they're not just going to walk straight across the street, sit down in a coffee shop, and start logging into your systems one after another. And so if you have 100 systems, you don't have any provisioning in place whatsoever, what that really means, you're still provisioning. There are still people creating accounts and deleting accounts, but it's almost certainly a case that it's provisioning by memo or provisioning by email. So when you turf that poor person with their cactus, what you're really doing after the fact is you're sending 100 emails to 100 admins that you expect them all to pay perfect attention, you expect them all to log into their administrative console of their applications, and you expect them all to turn this user off. And every administrator who doesn't do that, every administrator who's on holiday or couldn't care less, or is maybe malicious and has not turned off that account for a reason, is accruing risk for the organization. So that's the simple definition that we're working with right now. Any questions on this definition? I mean, it's a narrow definition, and I do recognize that. But we're working towards SCIM very specifically, that's why. All right. So I just want to talk about some provisioning components, because again, we're narrowing down to SCIM. So this isn't meant to be a global, broad overview of the entire world. The way that most provisioning works is you have 3 pieces. You have a process which somehow changes that state of your organization or of your user. You have a trigger, and so that trigger could be the act of making the change to the data. It could be something simpler like understanding that a change log has occurred or seeing an audit log. It could be a big red button that somebody's pushed. And then the last piece is fulfillment. So as an example to this, an example of a process might be that a user goes in and fills out a self-service name change form on their intranet because they've gotten married and they've decided to take on their husband's or a significant other's name. That would be the process. The trigger is probably the submission of that form, although it also might be the approval by the user's employee, or user's manager, I mean. And then the last piece is really what we're going to try and dig into today, which is the fulfillment. So now that Active Directory, as an example, has been updated with this user's fantastic new married name, something has to go out. Something has to recognize that it's changed, and something has to then be called or executed in order to push that change out to all the places where it needs to be. Replace the original now out-of-date, obsolete value. All right, so now we get to the fun stuff. We talk about SCIM. What is SCIM? What does it even mean? Well, this is the highly technical definition, right? That probably doesn't mean that much to most human beings. It is actually a ratified standard in the IETF, so it has an RFC number, 2 of them in fact, which makes it very fancy and very official. It stands for System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, and I don't know if it's cooler to talk about it like RFC 7644. I don't know. You guys can decide. But what it really is a very simple REST API, but a standardized REST API. And we'll go through why that's important in a minute. The second piece, so one of those is really the protocol for asking and getting. The other one, 7643, is the schema that tries to actually describe what it is that you're asking for and getting. All right, so great. Now we have this thing called SCIM. We have a REST API, and it's standardized. So what's it going to do for us? Well, the truth is, in this world we have of all these systems managing all these attributes about all these users in all these different states, they all have things in common, right? They all tend to want to know things like your last name, your first name. They may have different understandings of identifiers like login IDs. So some of the data diverges, some of the data stays the same, some of it is dependent or calculated from the original. So the bottom line is we end up with all these little silos, and we're trying to bridge those silos. Now, what happens today is that those silos have to be bridged separately, and one by one, every single application separately examined, taken apart, figure out, is it MySQL, is it Oracle, is it X, is it Y, is it Z? And that is not very scalable. And I believe that divergent identities are bad, and they make admins sad, and that admins don't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to separately integrate every single application they have out there, because they often have a lot of them, and the applications change. So what we're really looking for is not a brittle system where you have to do one-off, essentially data contracts to push data up and down. We don't want to do that, right? We want to start to treat every application in the same way, which is the whole idea of an interface, right? You decouple the back-end complexity from the actual mechanism for communicating so that you can start to operate at scale. And that's why SCIM is so great, because it gives us at least a start. Now, it's not perfect, and every application has extra fancy data, but it gives us a programmatic way to talk about the things that are common, and it gives us a way to extend our schema so that we can accommodate our other more specific pieces of data that we might have to operate only on a one-off fashion per application. All right, so I'm going to skip past that because we're going to cover it one by one and talk about this magic view of provisioning. So far we've talked about the fact that we've got diverging data. We're trying to control that data and bring it back into a common organizational state. So what that sounds like is sort of voodoo magic, right? So you have a magical person named Val, and there's one true vision, one true shining vision of this person called Val, and that we're just going to push that reality into multiple systems so that everyone knows who Val is. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It's a lovely idea, but there are a lot of problems with this. First of all, not everyone has the same view of who Val is in the first place. So, and not only that, you probably don't want to share every piece of information to every application you have. So ultimately what you want to do is construct small constrained views of Val that are related, maybe not even to a single common understanding, but that can be traced and audited and understood as every piece of Val coming from a separate authoritative source, or a set of authoritative sources. So what does the reality look like then? Well, this is your most common reality. Everyone's reality is different. That's the difficulty of user provisioning, right? But you probably have your admin, right? Or some admin, some HR person with admin rights who's, perhaps checking the OK box on a recruiting form, for example. And Val probably shows up in your HR system first, as an example, right? So he gets pushed into a database. You now have a representation of Val in a database. But that's not actually enough, because HR is only one facet of Val. So in fact, that idea of Val, the green one, comes first. It gets pushed up to the IT system where they decide they want to create an email address for Val, right? And boom, there's a new version of Val that's created that's related to the first but not identical, right? Now Val has an email address. The email address is not owned by HR. HR didn't create it, IT did. And then once Val exists as an Active Directory, chances are some portion of what's in Active Directory is going to push out to an application. So what you're really seeing here is Val appearing in different applications and changing in applications over time as a direct result of events occurring and taking place, like the recruitment event, like email, the administrator assigning an email, or maybe it's a script that runs that assigns the email. So, so Val is moving through the organization, right, as he requests new access rights, or maybe accrues new things like promotions or changes jobs. His image changes and ripples over time. And that's fine. We want it to be fluid. We just don't want it to be divergent. We want it to be based on some authoritative source, rather than having copies of data in places that never get updated. All right, so the next piece, we're going to do this last one, and then we're going to get into the fun stuff, which is the SCIM stuff. Provisioning versus synchronization. So this is a bit of a gray area, I would say, in our industry, unless anyone wants to argue with me. But synchronization often is akin to mirroring or replication, where you're trying to make an exact copy. The only time where synchronization really means something else is when we're just talking about syncing in a more casual way, right? Provisioning, generally speaking, does not mean exact synchronization. There could be many, many reasons why you don't want to put exactly the same data, have that exact same data in two different data repositories. For example, you may want to mask information. So you may store a user's birth date in HR, but you may only want to actually push to your applications the fact that that user is over 18, as an example. So, or you may not want to replicate, I don't know how many groups you guys have in your Active Directories, but lots of people have hundreds of thousands of groups. So do you need to put all of those hundreds of thousands of groups into every application? Absolutely not, right? If you can only put the subset of users, a subset of groups into an application that they need, then everything's cleaner. You adhere to least privilege. All right, so let's have some fun here. We've talked of, let's see, how are we doing for time? We've got 30 minutes. All right, so yeah, before we stop, let's get you guys going, and then we can come back to this and talk about what we're now going to do with SCIM. So in SCIM, what's really happening is a REST client is operating on an interface. So you have some kind of active code that's running that's going to query your SCIM interface, and that could do things like push a user into an app. It could do things like pull a user out of an app, or delete them, or soft delete them, disable them. The client, the relationship between a SCIM server, also known as a service provider, and a client is not always a case of a provider and a consumer. It can, there is this push-pull relationship that can exist. All right, so let's talk about prerequisites. Here's what you need to get started with SCIM. There's only 3 things you need. First thing you need are client credentials. And for those of you who are not familiar very much with the API world, there's really only 2 kinds of credentials you're going to get for an interface like SCIM. You're either going to get basic authorization credentials, or you're going to get bearer authorization credentials. A basic authorization credential is about passing basically an identifier and a secret as authorization to access the API. So that could be a username and password. It could be an API key and secret. You know, there's sort of a number of fancy names, but it really is identifier and secret together. And you have to put a colon in the middle and base64 encode it to make it work. That's not a best practice if you can get away with not doing it. And the reason why it's not a best practice is, of course, because if it's your user credentials that you're putting into that header, then anyone who steals that header can impersonate your user completely everywhere they go, and unless you're doing something fancy like multi-factor authentication. But either way, putting usernames and passwords in the authorization header sucks, and we don't like it because we're identity people. So that brings us to bearer. Bearer authorization credentials are also very simple, but they're kind of scary when you're getting started. So all a bearer credential means is that you, instead of collecting or knowing a credential and passing it to your API, and the API validates that, we're going to pass it instead to an authorization server. And that authorization server is going to validate that credential one time and give us back a token, called an access token usually, that you then include in the header. So instead of username password every single time, it's, for example, a username password to the authorization server, you get a token back, and then you can make 1,000 calls to your REST API using that authorization header. When it doesn't mean people can't steal that authorization header. It does mean if the authorization header gets stolen, there's no impersonation possibilities, right? You might be able to access that one API, but you can't log into their email. You can't, approve their paychecks, whatever the possible things that could happen if a password gets stolen. All right, second is the SCIM server hostname and port. And that's what I'm going to paste into the WebEx here shortly for you guys to all access the lovely Salesforce interop endpoint. And then the last thing you need is a client. So you can use a very simple client, or you can use a very fancy client. I'm going to have us use curl to start with because it's accessible almost everywhere. And I'm going to have you guys use a Chrome browser app called Postman, which is pretty, I don't know how people could get by with Postman. I don't feel like I could. So if you all have access to Chrome, I would request that you download it. You can obviously watch me as I do it as well. Because it's a Chrome app, it'll run on any platform, so it has advantages. Okay, so that means I'm going to kick out of here. I'm going to get you guys a URL for those of you who are following along. This is where we get to test our plan, our brilliant plan. So I'm going to give you the password to this account. I assume I don't have to tell you not to do this at home. All right. It's a super complex password. Okay, so this is, I believe, does not actually require any authorization. So I think anyone who's following along can take this link that I just pasted in here. Let's do it at the same time. Take this link that's pasted in here, open up any browser, and click into it to see it. So this does not require an authorization header at all. It's unauthorized. And what it represents is an endpoint called the service provider config. So it's kind of the start here of SCIM. It tells you what this service provider can do and what they can't. Now, this is not readable, right? You guys can't read this. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it into Postman, which we will talk about in a second, so that it becomes readable. So this is the joy of Postman. Pretty printed, colorized information. So here is, actually I have a screenshot of what it looks like. PowerPoint that's probably a bit more readable. All right, so you guys should be able to inspect that. What you're going to see is that there are things like, are bulk operations supported? are, can you make filter statements, like filter for everyone who has a certain title? Can you change the password, right? So this is sort of all the stuff you need to know if you're going to try and do complex things with SCIM. The other thing it does is talks about authentication schemes. So you can see here that the authentication scheme is OAuth 2, and what OAuth 2 means is it's a bearer client credential. So that kind of sets you down the path of being able to know what to do next. The other cool thing about the SCIM spec for the schema is there's a documentation URL. So instead of having to Google over half of the internet to find out what OAuth authentication schemes are supported by Salesforce, you can actually go look at that documentation URL. So, I mean, it's like people are making things for users these days or something. All right, so were you guys able to get that URL okay? Make it work?
How did you get on the web?
Oh, I tweeted it. Are you guys, if you're on Twitter, you can pull it up and look for the CIS NOLA Twitter sign. Hold on. What I should have done was given it I did give it a custom hashtag. Hold on. I was just trying to be a smart aleck, but.
Just Google Pam Dingle too.
Oh yeah, just search for Pamela Rosie D. That's my Twitter handle. I wonder if we've gotten any responses. Let's see. I think that'll show mine. Right, so if you look at the hashtag, if you don't know, just ignore. That's going to be the actual URL here. And we've got quite a few people on the WebEx here, so hopefully that's working. All right, we'll let the rest of you guys get on. Is there anyone who's still having trouble getting on? We can send one of our front runners back to give you a hand if you need it. Okay, I'm going to say that's no. We'll go to the next one. So this is the easiest thing you can possibly do, right? Start here, figure out what to do next. The next step is figuring out actually how to do OAuth 2. And so it's easy when you have a system and the system is, this is dying. Try this one more time. I mean, we deal with OAuth 2 all the time, but we do a lot of it with single sign-on, where there's a lot of redirects back and forth. We don't have to type any of it. It's a little bit different with SCIM, right? You actually have to construct a URL, and you need to construct all the right parameters in all the right places. But it's a one-line request. So it sounds scary, but it's really, really not. All we're going to do is we're going to make an HTTP call to an authorization server, and we're going to pass it our username and password. And what comes back will be an access token that we then get to use for all the rest of our SCIM transactions. So let's try that right now. I will show you first what it looks like, and then I'll paste it in there. Oops. Okay. PowerPoint's not very happy with me.
Can you send out the link again? It's apparently not in there if you signed up after.
The Twitter link, you mean?
Yeah. We know that the Twitter I got, the actual URL, that long-ass integral curve developer edition.
If you join WebEx after
Yeah,
it's been posted, it's not.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Okay, my screen is going absolutely nuts here.
Is there nothing?
Here we go.
I'll read the posted.
Oh, yeah, if you could, that'd be great. Okay, my computer is.
It's actually like a real WebEx.
I know, my computer is doing things that usually only happen when I'm in customer meetings that are really important. Okay. I guess you guys, it makes you guys important. Don't you feel good? Okay, stop. All right. Apparently I opened Twitter and it broke the world. All right, so let's bring back Postman. And there we go. So let me try this one more time and see if it's going to flip out again. I hope not. All right, so this is what I'm going to post, except it's not going to be colorized. It's not going to be all pretty. But literally, you're going to be able to get this thing and just copy-paste it as long as you have this application called curl. So you can find out, if you're on a Mac, then you're going to have it right away. If you're on Windows, you're going to need to do a little bit of work. But here's what it is. So curl executes a fetch. In this case, it's going to execute an HTTP GET against the target, which is down here. So SCIM2-integral curve dash blah, 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 slash OAuth2/token. So that's the OAuth2 token endpoint. So we're using a flow called the password flow, which means we're embedding as in the GET statement, in the address bar, the user's username and password. So it's not the most secure thing that you ever saw in the whole world. But here, I'm just going to read this to you really quick, right? You've got a client ID, which is a big, long thing. You've got a client secret, which is another big, long thing. You've got a username, which in this case is also fairly hefty, and a password, which I've redacted here, but I will paste into the WebEx. Okay, so we're going to pass, what's that, essentially four parameters that are pretty self-explanatory. And we're going to post it to that token, and we're going to get JSON back, right? So that's all it is. It isn't fancy, fancy, fancy. It's make a request, get a thing back, parse the thing, and move forward. So let's try it right now. And this is unique testing, also the endpoint, when 20 people all try to do it at the same time. All right, do you guys have that? Did that come out in a oh. See?
You may want to break this into pieces.
Yeah, right.
Or actually, you may not. We may actually want to do it all as one line, because what's happening is it's getting broken.
It is one line, or at least it was. Let me check again. Yeah, it is all one line, but I think it's being broken. This whole encoding thing is a real pain in the butt. All right. I'm going to pass it as separate chunks just to be absolutely sure you can pick it up and use it. There's the first one. Okay, so those are the headers. Here's all the parameters, or 3 of the 4 parameters. And here's the username and the endpoint. So these 3 things should be pastable one after the other. All right, I'll let you guys play with that. I'm going to show you what it looks like when it just simply gets pasted into a terminal window. So I have curl installed. I'm going to paste that in. So same thing you just saw. And here's what comes back. So if we look at that in PowerPoint again, all nice and colorized. This is what you're going to get back. It's pretty easy, right? It's human readable. You grab it, you use it. Access token is the thing you want. So any SCIM endpoint you interact with that is going to be protected by OAuth 2, this is the thing you want. Okay, there are various flows for how you get to the point where it returns you a JSON blob like this. It might pop a browser, it might redirect you to an IDP, it might do multi-factor authentication. All of that stuff is separate. As someone who just wants to use SCIM, this is the thing that you care about. It comes back and you use it in your authorization header. Are you guys having success with that? Is that working for you yet? Okay, I'm going to keep going, and we can stop in a bit and see. So the thing you need to know about access tokens, and about this one specifically, is that Salesforce has done us a great favor by putting exclamation marks in the access token, because what that forces you to do is properly escape your access token, or it breaks things like command line shells. I don't know if you guys did that on purpose, but the exclamation marks aren't so hot if you've got double quotes around your access token when you try to put it in curl.
Try single quotes.
Oh yeah, single quotes works great. In fact, it just took me 15 minutes to figure that out first time. Okay, so while you guys are playing with that, we need to talk very, very briefly about key management. So what you're doing here, I mean, we have a password that we've pasted. You're putting it into the command line. You're pasting it over and over again. So there are some temptations and shortcuts that are absolutely natural at this stage that you are welcome to do in a non-production system, but I would strongly recommend against you doing in a production system. So please don't make a command alias that includes your password, if you can possibly avoid it, or your client secret. Please don't put it in a file that everyone can read. And whatever you do, don't check him into GitHub. So there are all sorts of attacks going on right now. People are literally just parsing GitHub. They're just watching everything that's coming into GitHub and looking for AWS credentials, for example, or other credentials. You can, if you post your client secrets into AWS, I have heard of them being compromised within the hour. So it's really important to have good hygiene around how any developer who's working with SCIM is going to use these credentials. And the other thing is that there are flows for OAuth called JOT bearer flow and SAML bearer flow, where you can actually hook this whole thing up to your corporate infrastructure and get an access token back rather than relying on a username and password. So it has a lot to do with what's supported at your actual service provider. But the better the flow you can have, the less likely you are your secrets will be compromised. All right, so I'm hoping that you guys have got to the point where you might be able to make the curl call that I put through again. I have another one here, and this one's for listing users. So pardon? Oh.
Can you stuff that in the chat thing again?
Oh, that's the wrong one. That is the wrong one. That's right. I will find it here. It's totally the wrong one. Luckily, I have two here. All right, so I'm going to show you in curl what it's going to be to actually use that access token you just saw. Of course, I have to exit out again because... There we go. All right, we'll take this second one, not the first one that I managed to paste to the screen in error. Paste this into the WebEx. Next time I think I'll have a WebEx paster, like a external paster. All right, so the one I pasted is with an access token that's probably expired. So you're gonna need to replace the access token you got with the access token in here. But literally what I'm doing here is an HTTP GET on an endpoint called the user's endpoint. So it's some URL/users. That is all there is to the SCIM endpoint. Nothing fancier than /users. We're gonna try it right now. So I'm gonna take this and paste it. I'm going to replace this. You can watch my bad cursor activity. Notice the single quotes, whoops. Very important to remember the single quotes. I know I should have Emacs mode turned on. So I'm literally just changing the thing that goes beside bearer in here. So you can see I've created a header called authentication with, inside of that is the word bearer, a space, and this new access token that we just received. And that is literally a dump of every user that the SCIM interface is allowing you to see in a beautifully well-formatted form, don't you think? All right, so right, and I did paste it, right? I pasted the right one that time, I think, to make that work. Yeah, that's not right. That's not right, but the one I pasted, I believe, is right. So the bottom line is curl is simple, and it works quite well for the OAuth step of this, and it's very, very useless for any kind of further interaction via SCIM, in my opinion. And if you have curl foo, then great, right? But for most of us, we're like, you're kidding, right? You gotta be kidding. We don't wanna work with stuff this way. It's hard. We have to recompose it every single time rather than have something that's remembered and just use it. So curl's amazing for one-offs, but what I would recommend is the alternative of Postman. So Postman gives you a GUI, does all the same things that curl does, but runs as an app and lets you do things like, takes care of things like encodings and spaces in your filters and easy copy and paste between bodies and headers, as well as pretty printing. So here's an example of what we've already seen. So this is the service provider config. And this is what the Postman interface looks like. I won't talk about it too much. However, when we talked about the target at the very beginning, right? The target goes in the big address bar kind of deal. You can set headers and you can set a request body on the top side. So all that stuff right under the endpoint are all the request characteristics. And what's down below is the response. So you can see, it's a 200 OK that's come back because it tells you so. It'll give it to you in a more human readable stuff. You know that you've got JSON back. You know that you set an authorization header as bearer. So what I would suggest now is if you can get to Postman, open it up and try and run that same URL with the same access token and see if it's going to work. All right, so we spent a lot of time just to get up to this point where you can list users, right? But now we get to do fun things with users. All of the interactions with users happens on the user's endpoint. It's really, really straightforward. If you post a user object to the user's endpoint, a user will be created unless they exist already, et cetera, et cetera. If you run delete, the user will be deleted if they can be deleted, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an attempt to really align with any other REST interface that you have. And the other thing that you need to know is that once a user is created, they are assigned an ID. And in classic REST format, you can operate on that user by operating, making a get or a post or a put to /users/ and their ID number. So let's do that right now. So are you guys to the point where you're able to run that account and or run that command and see stuff? Okay, good. So let's try and create a user then. I'll show you how to do it, and I will send you the minimal user that you would have to put in the body of Postman. The URL is the same one that you already had, so you should be able to already construct that. All right, so literally we're going to create an object made out of JSON that's got some attributes about a user. We're going to throw it in the body of the request. We're going to change the mode of our fetch to a post. We're going to make sure we have our authorization bearer header, and we're going to submit it to the SCIM endpoint and create a user. So if you guys, I'm going to post a sample. If you could change it enough to have your data in it, you don't have to use real data. It can be Bugs Bunny, it can be anyone else. But if you pick something that ain't somebody else, if two people pick Bugs Bunny, then they pick Bugs Bunny. Oh yeah, well, let's talk about that right now. So this is what we're going to post. There are essentially 3 types of things that you're going to send in here. You're going to send a username, which is required by the spec. So you have to use a username attribute. And then there are things that are required by the service provider. There's another endpoint called /schemas that will actually tell you which things are required and optional by your service provider, right? Same thing as /service provider config, /schemas will tell you this. And then there's the other stuff that you want to put in there. So if you want to Google for RFC 7643 or for OAuth 2.0 schema, you can see all of the attributes that are possible and the JSON definitions for those attributes. Okay, so what I'm going to send you is exactly this little template. All you need to do is alter it so that the facts are the same, but the names have been changed, if you know what I mean. All right, so you guys should have it now. So you should be able to post it, and I'm going to post one right now so that those of you who aren't on a computer can see this. So let's open up Postman. All right, so we're going to make sure that we are going to the user's endpoint. I'll make a new one so it's not messy. So we're going to go to the user's endpoint. We want to create a user, so we're going to change this to post. We're going to add our authorization header. So, by the way, Postman will take care of some OAuth flows, like do all the requests and responses anyway. Password flow, it won't. So in this one case, I'm actually going to create a header called authorization, bearer space, and go back to my curl command. There's my access token. All right, I'm going to switch to the body. I'm going to cheat and pull it from here. All right, we're going to set it to raw, post it in here. Oops. All right, now if the demo gods are with us, post it. So you can see it's sending. If it's created properly, it's going to return an HTTP 201, which is created. It tells you that the object has been created. Yes?
You want us to have active to false?
You can set active to true. It doesn't actually matter for this. You can set it either way because we're not going to operate one way or the other. But yeah, you can in fact delete active from there altogether. So.
Yeah, so the most important thing if you're going to play with this is your username needs to be unique. I highly recommend taking like your first part of your email address at scimdemo.org. It's a good one. And that entitlement number.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, should I go?
Where is it? This one?
The entitlement number needs to be changed?
No, leave that alone.
Yeah.
You
Don't
do
touch that.
Squirrely things are going to happen.
Nice.
Right.
Well, it'll just throw an error. Yeah.
All right. So what you can see is there's a status up here of 201 created, so it was successful in my case. And what you can see is it's actually going to play back to you the created attribute pretty well in its entirety. So there are attributes that have been created that didn't exist when you pushed your object into the database. And most important is this ID object, right?
Did you say replace the double quotes with single quotes?
Around the access token, you need single quotes around the access token.
It's in Postman. I got a weird error, unexpected character, and it appears to be a double quote.
Oh yeah, you don't need it. Sorry, if it's in curl, curl takes care of all the encodings and escapings and other things. Yeah, so sorry, Postman takes care of all the encodings and stuff. You do not need quotes at all for that. Yeah. So, for example, in mine here, that's what mine looks like there. If that helps. Oh, in the body. All right. No, you should be able to paste it verbatim, leave all the quotes the way they are. You don't need single quotes in the JSON object at all. Only in curl. Okay. Well, we'll come through and walk through. So we're getting to the end of this. There's a couple things I just want to go over. We can keep playing with this, keep trying to create things. I want to just show you a couple of things so that you have tools to play after this. Filters. Filters are important. You can use a filter to search on one user rather than just getting all users every time by doing a plain old get on /users. So you can see here, it's essentially a parameter called $filter equals. And what you need to put after that is a URL encoded search term. And so in this case, we have username space equals space and my username. If you perform that search, you're going to find my user. Now, this is a curl call, right? This is not or a command line call. So I've had to escape the spaces to %20. If you do it in Postman, you don't have to do that, right? You can actually construct it.
So the filters, are they included in the specification or in some implementation?
Filters included in the specification, and not everybody supports it. But if you go into service provider config, you can tell whether a certain provider supports it or not. But it's an interesting thing because the way SCIM is constructed, you can use it in one of two ways. You can use it as a database abstraction, or you can use it as a command and control for pushing and pulling, right? Filter kind of gives you some interesting abilities to do things like show me all the users with a certain title, or show me, it's a much, much closer to an LDAP type of construct.
Did it change significantly from 1.1?
Filter, so filter I don't think was even widely implemented in 1.1.
It is in our pink that
Well, yeah, we have it, but but I don't think all of the,
Is it the same scheme for doing that, so I can just copy a filter from one of my?
yes, I believe it is. I don't think that you guys didn't change that at all, did you?
That problem I had was some weird double quote character that wasn't a legit double quote character that came in from the web browser.
Oh yeah, smart quotes. That's a smart quote thing. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to paste a couple other things in, but what I don't want to do is cut into Kelly's time unless Kelly's not actually here yet, in which case. Oh, good. Hi, Kelly. Okay, that makes me happy. Let me just cover a couple of small other things very, very quickly. All right, so we talked about filtering. I just want to really briefly talk about ETags and version. So what you're going to see when you play with the SCIM interface, when you read users and when you make changes to users, is that they actually have a version associated with a given instance in time or snapshot of user data called the ETag. And there's actually two pieces. I'm told that they are always identical, ETag and version. Version is inside, so if you go look at your JSON that's returned, say, on a list, you're going to see version in the meta attributes, which include attributes like when it was last modified, et cetera. ETag is a header. So it depends on what you're doing, but the great thing about ETag is you can tell if something's changed, right? You don't have to compare object to object to know if something's changed from the last time you looked. You just need to remember what the last ETag was and compare it to the current ETag to know whether there's something that has to be synchronized or not. All right, so I got us to the point where we're interacting. That's about as far as a simple SCIM setup would be. I'm going to post a few more things into the WebEx so that you guys can keep playing. What's coming up next is builds on this, but not, I don't think, in the same hands-on way. So what we've got Kelly coming up right now, who's going to take more of a developer approach, right? Talk about some of the more advanced features of SCIM, and then when we're done that, we're going to do an interop readout of all of the participants who've been working on SCIM together in the last, 3 months? 3 months or so. A couple days, yeah. The last 45 minutes before the actual presentation was due. Any questions before I jump off the stage? I think we've got 2 minutes till the break is supposed to start. Yeah.
Do you mind going to the architecture diagram where you have SCIM, client, and
Yes, I would be happy to. The one with the cute little robot? As you can see, this is how my brain works. If I have pictures of cute robots, I'm happy. Oh, that was a long time ago. There we go. This one?
Yeah, I mean, is it implied that one SCIM server is taking care of all user provisioning in different repositories, or like each repository is supposed to have their own SCIM server?
Oh, good questions. So the question is, and I might get you guys to answer who are actually implementing it, but the question is, in this picture I've depicted separate repositories, each with a SCIM server interface sitting in front of them. It certainly doesn't have to be that way, especially if some of these things are inside a network perimeter. You could have a SCIM provisioning system that knows how to make MySQL calls and JDBC calls and things like that. However, as soon as you get to the cloud, as soon as it's a different domain, pretty well the requirement is for a separate interface. Some of them could be clients, right? They don't all have to be servers either. So you could, in theory, have a system in AWS, for example, that is not a SCIM service provider, doesn't offer an interface, but instead makes calls home to a central interface to pull data into it. Would you guys make any additional comments on that? Okay, and we had one more. Batch. Oh, I'm sorry, that's an advanced concept. I'm totally going to dish on that one and make you answer it.
All right, well, I'll just do this.
Oh, maybe I'll do it with this. Okay. Batch, it was a holdover from 1.1, where I was in the original SCIM. And it is among the least implemented parts of SCIM that exist. And part of the reason we think, like the people that have been working on it, we think it's sort of been unimplemented, is that most people will just end up rate limiting you as you're sort of going through and doing these events, and so batch isn't quite as needed. Now that being said, we haven't turned it on in the Salesforce side of things, both in our 1.1 and 2.0. Kelly, did you guys enable it? Batch? Yeah. Just haven't seen it used. But I'd love to hear if you've got a use case for like, hey, I've got to go do like 100,000 accounts in one shot. Love to talk about that. I mean, the spec is fully fleshed out, but I can't name you anyone who's turned it on. So, unimplemented.
Okay, any more questions?
Unloved.
All right, so we're gonna get Kelly to get ready. We got 10 minutes, and hopefully you guys will come back and see some of the more advanced SCIM concepts and ideas. So thank you very much.
You should totally come back.
Definitely come back.